Humanity's presence in the galaxy was defined by an almost legendary patience. They had always been the species willing to negotiate, to seek common ground, to solve disputes diplomatically rather than through force. Known for their resilience and adaptability, humans had used these qualities to foster peace across diverse civilizations. They were seen as mediators, problem solvers, and the ones who would work tirelessly to maintain stability, even if it meant absorbing the insults and impositions of others. Over time, humans became the reliable peacekeepers of the galaxy, consistently willing to set aside their pride for the sake of unity. This patience, however, had its costs. Humanity's accommodating nature had led many species to see them as overly tolerant, almost endlessly forgiving. Minor slights, border disputes, and occasional betrayals were brushed aside by humans, often with a determined resolve to let it go for the greater good. Humanity's consistent restraint was viewed as a weakness by certain factions, who began to exploit their goodwill. Where humans sought compromise, others took advantage, pushing boundaries further, each time assuming that humanity would respond with calm reasoning rather than confrontation. For years, humanity absorbed these provocations, believing that their role as peacekeepers was a necessary sacrifice. They maintained alliances even when treated as lesser, choosing to believe that cooperation would eventually lead to mutual respect. Human diplomats defended their approach, arguing that patience was a strength, that stability was worth the price of occasional disregard. They reasoned that as long as they could prevent major conflicts, the small slights and disrespect were secondary concerns. The galaxy, however, did not see this as strength. Instead, many factions grew bolder, emboldened by humanity's forgiving nature and convinced that their patience was limitless. Among human leaders, however, there was a growing tension. Quietly, they began to recognize that this path of unending tolerance had a limit, one that was being approached with each new incident. While they continued to present a unified front, whisperings of discontent circulated among them. Military leaders voiced their concerns, citing reports of ongoing disrespect and warning that humans could not afford to let these slights accumulate indefinitely. Civilians, too, began to feel the strain, questioning why humanity consistently bore the burden of peacekeeping when it seemed to yield only exploitation. The human populace was aware of the sacrifices being made, and while they were proud of their reputation as peacekeepers, they could feel the quiet resentment building beneath the surface. The belief in diplomacy and unity was part of humanity's ethos, but so was the understanding that respect must be mutual. Ordinary citizens began to question the value of alliances that left them vulnerable, treated as expendable by the very species they protected. Each time humanity was slighted, it left a mark, a growing awareness that their patience was being taken for granted. As incidents continued to pile up, humanity's leaders began to take a closer look at their place within the galaxy. They saw that their role as peacekeepers had not earned them the respect they had hoped for. Rather, it had positioned them as a buffer, a species expected to absorb tension and conflict without protest. Their diplomatic efforts had succeeded in maintaining a fragile stability, but at the expense of their dignity. Humanity had shouldered the galaxy's burdens, believing that their patience would one day be recognized as strength, but now, it seemed to have only made them targets for exploitation. The leaders of human territories met in private, assessing the toll that endless tolerance had taken. They recognized that, while patience had been their guiding principle, it was no longer sustainable in the face of growing disrespect. Discussions turned from how to preserve alliances to how to command respect without compromising their values. Humanity's role as the galaxy's peacekeepers had kept them restrained, yet they now saw that restraint had only invited further disregard. Leaders agreed that a change in approach was needed but held off on any drastic decisions, aware that they were balancing on a delicate edge. The underlying frustration was palpable. Humanity had given the galaxy countless chances to work together in peace, yet these efforts seemed to yield nothing but complacency from their allies and disregard from their rivals. They had provided aid, sacrificed resources, and mediated conflicts that didn't directly concern them, all in the name of stability. But the more they gave, the less respect they seemed to receive. Humanity had been willing to bear this weight, hoping that their example would eventually foster true cooperation. But as the years passed, it became clear that their patience was being mistaken for passivity. The question of how far their patience could stretch began to loom over every decision. Human leaders found themselves faced with the reality that their people were reaching a breaking point. They had held their silence, tolerated indignities, and restrained their responses for so long that even their closest allies assumed it was an inherent trait, an unbreakable, limitless tolerance. But the quiet frustration had been growing, seeping into every sector of human society. From diplomats to civilians, humanity was beginning to see that their role as peacekeepers had left them vulnerable, and there was only so much they could take before something had to give. As humanity continued to endure the dismissals and slights, a sense of resolve began to form. They would not abandon their commitment to peace, but they could no longer allow it to come at the cost of their dignity. They had maintained alliances with those who saw them as expendable, believing that the galaxy would come to see their patience as a strength. But with each new insult, the illusion that their sacrifices would one day be reciprocated grew thinner. Humanity's patience was deep, but beneath it lay a strength that no one seemed to understand, one that had been restrained for too long. The galaxy assumed humanity would remain the quiet mediators, content to absorb any disrespect if it meant avoiding conflict. But those closest to humanity could see the change, a quiet but undeniable shift from patience to determination. The breaking point arrived when a longtime ally, a species that humanity had defended and supported through numerous conflicts, committed an unthinkable betrayal. The attack came without warning, a brutal assault on a human outpost positioned on the frontier of known space. The outpost was primarily civilian, home to researchers, families, and workers who had trusted in the security of humanity's alliances. The devastation was swift and merciless, leaving no survivors. It wasn't just an attack on a location. It was an attack on the very trust humanity had extended so freely to the galaxy. The impact of the betrayal rippled through human society, hitting every corner with a profound shock and sorrow. News of the massacre spread rapidly, and with it, a wave of grief that quickly transformed into fury. Human leaders, who had long held firm in their commitment to diplomacy, were faced with the unimaginable, an unprovoked attack by an ally they had protected time and again. This ally had received human aid, shared in the benefits of human technology, and been defended by human forces against countless threats. Yet here they were, repaying those sacrifices with violence. Humanity's patience, their commitment to peace and unity, had been shattered in an instant. The sense of betrayal ran deep, cutting through generations of goodwill and shared purpose. Across human territories, the response was immediate and unified. Citizens, leaders, and soldiers alike were done with forgiving, done with assuming the best intentions of those who treated them as expendable. Calls for justice spread through every colony, every station, and every human outpost. For the first time, humanity's leaders found themselves aligned not just in grief but in a growing resolve to act decisively. It was clear to all that the time for endless tolerance had passed. This betrayal was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that humanity's trust had been treated not as a gift but as a vulnerability to exploit. As human representatives convened, the usual discourse of restraint and understanding was absent. Instead, there was a fierce, unanimous agreement that action was necessary, not for revenge, but to restore the balance of respect that had been shattered. The council members, who had become accustomed to human patience, were taken aback by the strength of humanity's response. Human leaders made it clear that they would no longer be treated as the galaxy's expendable peacekeepers, a species willing to accept any slight in the name of unity. Their message was unambiguous. The time for tolerance had ended, and the galaxy would see a side of humanity that had been restrained for far too long. The species responsible for the attack attempted to downplay their actions, offering weak excuses and claiming it was a misunderstanding, but humanity was unmoved. Every attempt to deflect responsibility only fueled the outrage spreading through human territories. Diplomatic gestures were rejected outright, as human leaders and citizens alike rejected any possibility of compromise. There was no room left for excuses. Humanity's decision was made. They would respond in full, showing the galaxy that betrayal came with a price, one that no amount of diplomatic posturing could lessen. Leaders across human space mobilized resources, calling on their fleets and rallying their defenses with a level of unity that left no room for hesitation. The betrayal had cut through their ideals of peace, exposing the harsh reality that not every species valued humanity's commitment to diplomacy. Humanity's patience had always been rooted in strength, but this moment revealed a deeper resolve, one forged through years of sacrifice and tempered by repeated slights. Now, with this final betrayal, humanity had reached the limit of their tolerance, and they were ready to act with the full measure of their capabilities. Throughout human society, there was a sense of release, as though the years of quiet frustration and unspoken anger had finally found an outlet. Military personnel who had trained for decades under the banner of defense now prepared to take action, knowing that their role was no longer just to protect but to ensure that humanity's boundaries were respected. Civilians, too, lent their support, understanding that their patience had not been reciprocated and that it was time to demand the respect that had been withheld for so long. This wasn't merely a military mobilization, it was a societal awakening, a shift in humanity's collective consciousness. The Council, long accustomed to humanity's role as peacemakers, was left in a state of shock as reports of human preparations circulated. Other species, who had taken comfort in humanity's forgiving nature, began to realize the severity of the situation. They had never considered that humanity's patience had limits. They had believed, wrongly, that humans would continue to endure insult after insult, attack after attack, all in the name of maintaining peace. But now they were confronted with the truth, that humanity's patience, once thought to be boundless, had finally snapped. This shift sent ripples through the galaxy as factions re-evaluated their own positions and alliances. Species that had taken advantage of humanity's goodwill now saw that they had made a grave miscalculation. The ally responsible for the attack, now isolated and desperate, sought support but found none. Other factions, fearful of being associated with the betrayal, distanced themselves, leaving the aggressor to face humanity's response alone. The betrayal, intended to demonstrate power over humanity, had instead united humanity in a way that no outside threat ever had. They were no longer divided by diplomacy. They were united by a purpose as clear as it was resolute. In that moment, the galaxy understood that humanity's restraint had not been weakness but a choice they had offered willingly, hoping it would be respected. Now, with that choice disregarded, humanity was prepared to show a strength that was rooted not in weaponry alone, but in the resolve to stand for themselves and to demand the respect they had so freely given. The galaxy braced itself, understanding that humanity's response would not be another exercise in restraint. The betrayal had set something powerful in motion, and no species would forget the day humanity finally decided to act without holding back. Humanity's response was immediate and unrelenting. Within hours of the decision to act, fleets were mobilized, strategic teams dispatched, and a force assembled that was as precise as it was overwhelming. No longer constrained by diplomatic restraint, humanity moved with a purpose the galaxy had never witnessed before. Their actions were swift, calculated, and left no room for misinterpretation. They weren't launching a campaign of revenge. They were delivering a message that would echo across every star system, every outpost, and every faction that had once taken their patience for granted. The species responsible for the betrayal barely had time to react. Human fleets descended upon their territories, dismantling defenses with a level of efficiency that spoke to years of preparation, patience, and skill. This was not an uncontrolled assault but a systematic dismantling of their capability to wage further harm. Human ships, equipped with cutting-edge technology, intercepted every attempt to communicate for help, blocking transmissions and leaving the aggressors isolated and vulnerable. Humanity's focus was unyielding. They were there to make it clear that betrayal would no longer be tolerated. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity carried out each maneuver with unerring precision. Gone were the polite negotiations and offers of compromise. In their place was an undeniable show of force, orchestrated with the kind of discipline that only came from years of restrained strength. Every move was exact, every strike intentional, each one reinforcing the message that humanity was no longer the galaxy's silent guardian. They had taken every lesson from years of diplomacy and applied it with brutal clarity, demonstrating that patience was not weakness but a choice, and one they could abandon when pushed too far. As the days passed, the message reached every corner of the galaxy. News of humanity's response traveled faster than light itself, shaking those who had once considered them overly forgiving. The reports were consistent. Humanity wasn't interested in occupying territories or imposing dominance. They were there to reset the balance, to ensure that their role in the galaxy was no longer one of silent endurance but of respected strength. Their actions were both a warning and a lesson. They had given the galaxy every chance to value their patience, and now, in its place, they offered the reminder that peace was only as strong as the respect that upheld it. The species responsible for the betrayal, once confident in their assumption that humanity would react with restraint, found themselves facing the full force of that miscalculation. Their fleets, crippled by the initial strikes, had no chance to regroup, no opportunity to retaliate. Humanity's forces moved with a level of precision that left them dismantled and helpless, surrounded by an unbreakable line of human ships. Every avenue of escape was blocked, every attempt to communicate outside their borders intercepted. The galaxy saw firsthand that humanity's strength, once dismissed as secondary to their diplomacy, was formidable in its own right. Other species began reevaluating their own alliances, realizing that humanity's tolerance had been a privilege, not an expectation. They understood now that humanity's patience was not a passive trait but an active choice, one they had respected far too little. The display of power, tempered by discipline, left a lasting impression. Humanity hadn't attacked out of rage, they had acted with the clear, controlled intent of a species done with being underestimated. The balance of the galaxy had shifted, and everyone recognized that humanity had assumed a new place within it, a place where they would be treated with the respect they had long earned but never demanded. Throughout human territories, this response sparked a unity and pride that permeated every colony, station, and planet. For too long, they had accepted a role that left them open to exploitation, trusting that their patience would eventually be recognized. But now, as they saw their fleets stand firm, as they watched humanity take its rightful place, they felt a collective understanding that this was the way forward. Their reputation as peacekeepers would remain, but it would be fortified by a reminder that peace was a choice, and one that required mutual respect. The galaxy's leaders reached out, attempting to establish new terms of alliance, their tones now filled with respect that had previously been absent. Humanity's leaders responded with a calm firmness, making it clear that future alliances would be built on equality, not tolerance. They laid down terms that underscored a hard-earned truth: their patience had limits, and those limits had been crossed. Any alliance with humanity would now come with a clear understanding that betrayal would not be forgiven, that peace would be protected by strength, and that respect was no longer negotiable. In the following days, remnants of the betraying species government tried to negotiate, pleading for mercy as they faced the consequences of their actions. Humanity's response was unwavering. They dismantled every threat, neutralized every point of aggression, and did so without extending their occupation beyond necessity. Their message was not one of conquest, it was one of finality. The aggressors were left with nothing but the reminder that their actions had consequences, and those consequences had reshaped the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. When humanity finally withdrew, they left behind a silence that reverberated throughout the galaxy. Their fleets returned home, their mission complete, but the impact of their actions remained. They had demonstrated that patience had its limits, and that beneath their willingness to mediate and compromise lay a strength that could not be ignored. Humanity had proven that they were more than willing to stand alone if it meant securing the respect they had so long been denied. This shift was irreversible. Humanity had shown the galaxy that the day they chose to act without restraint was a day that would not be forgotten. When the dust settled, the galaxy was left in a state of profound realization. Humanity's decisive response had not only punished the betraying species but had sent a shockwave through every civilization that had ever dismissed or underestimated them. For the first time, humanity's role in the galaxy was fully understood, not just as diplomats, not just as peacekeepers, but as a force that could act with absolute precision and resolve when provoked. The phrase, "humans finally snapped," circulated across star systems, becoming a defining marker of this new era, a moment in history that no species would soon forget. The species responsible for the betrayal had been utterly dismantled, left without defenses or allies, isolated by the very actions they had taken against humanity. Other species looked on, acutely aware that the humans had not sought to dominate or expand their influence. They had sought respect and balance. Humanity had chosen not to impose rule or occupy territories but to make it clear that betrayal had a cost. In their restrained response, humans conveyed that their actions were not fueled by conquest, but by an unshakable demand for respect. It was a reminder that their patience, while immense, was not infinite. Leaders across the galaxy convened in response to the new balance of power, discussions filled with an unprecedented respect for humanity. Where before, human representatives had been relegated to mediating roles and overlooked when it came to strategic decisions, they were now regarded with a level of authority that few could question. Humanity's intervention had shifted perceptions permanently, showing that they were a species capable of both peace and retribution, depending on how they were treated. Future alliances would be negotiated on new terms, ones that recognized humanity's value not only as mediators but as equal partners who demanded and deserved consideration. The Council, long accustomed to the notion of humans as ever-patient diplomats, found itself transformed by the outcome of humanity's response. Decisions involving human interests were now approached with a gravity and consideration that hadn't existed before. Council members recognized that they could no longer take humanity's cooperation for granted, that they would need to treat human proposals and warnings with the seriousness they warranted. Humanity's message had been clear: cooperation was no longer a given, and their involvement would require the same respect they had long extended to others. Across human territories, the impact of this transformation was deeply felt. Citizens who had once accepted their role as patient peacekeepers now looked upon humanity's actions with a sense of pride and identity rooted in strength and dignity. They understood that their society had reached a milestone, not by abandoning their principles, but by reinforcing them with resolve. Humanity's breaking point had not been a descent into aggression. It had been an assertion of balance, a declaration that they would no longer tolerate exploitation disguised as diplomacy. Their reputation as compassionate negotiators remained intact, but it was now layered with the understanding that this compassion came with clear boundaries. For younger generations, this moment became a lesson that would shape humanity's future role in the galaxy. Schools, academies, and cultural institutions preserved the story, ensuring that it would be remembered not as a tale of vengeance but as a story of dignity defended. Humanity's actions became a reminder that patience was a virtue, but one that required reciprocation to thrive. They had shown that true peace did not mean passively enduring wrongs, but actively demanding mutual respect. This philosophy would shape human policy, diplomacy, and society for generations to come, solidifying their place as a respected and principled force in the galaxy. The betrayed species, left weakened and exposed, served as a cautionary tale. Their former allies abandoned them, unwilling to risk association with a pariah. They faced the consequences of their actions alone, unable to undo the damage they had brought upon themselves. The galaxy watched as they struggled to rebuild, understanding that they had brought this fate upon themselves by underestimating humanity's resolve. Their fall was a stark reminder to all species that alliances with humanity were not to be taken lightly, that respect was the foundation of any relationship with them, and that betrayal would not be overlooked. In the years that followed, humanity's approach to alliances became a model for other species. Those who wished to build relationships with humans found that respect and mutual benefit were the cornerstones of any agreement. Humanity continued to offer diplomacy, trade, and aid, but on terms that emphasized equality and reciprocity. They had redefined what it meant to be an ally, establishing a standard that encouraged genuine partnership rather than opportunistic dependency. This approach fostered stronger alliances and greater stability, as other species came to value the strength and fairness that humanity brought to the galactic stage. The legacy of humanity's response extended far beyond the events themselves. The galaxy had been introduced to a new paradigm, one where peace was maintained not through unchecked tolerance but through balanced respect. Humanity had demonstrated that they were willing to stand alone if necessary, to act decisively when pushed too far. The phrase, "No species will forget the day humans finally snapped," became a constant reminder of the cost of disrespect and the importance of honor in interstellar relations. Humanity's actions had not only reshaped alliances but had also instilled a deeper understanding of the value of integrity among galactic leaders. As humanity continued to participate in the Council and galactic affairs, they did so with a presence that commanded attention. Their words were no longer subject to dismissal, their perspectives were treated as essential contributions. They had shown the galaxy that strength and diplomacy were not mutually exclusive, that patience was an asset but not a weakness. They had evolved from a species that others saw as merely tolerant to one that was respected for its principles and feared for its resolve. In asserting their boundaries, humanity had secured a place of enduring influence. The galaxy moved forward, changed by the events that had transpired, forever shaped by humanity's insistence on respect. For humans, the lesson was simple yet profound. They had demonstrated the power of patience balanced with strength. They had proven that their kindness was a choice, not a constraint, and that when that kindness was met with betrayal, they would not hesitate to defend their honor. The galaxy had seen humanity's breaking point, and it was a point they would remember indefinitely, woven into the history of every species that had once dared to take their patience for granted.